TB has been at least as old as recorded human history. And it has been one of the most feared and dreaded disease which has inflicted humankind. If you look at the kinds of phrases that was used to describe TB as a consumption, as a captain of all these men of death, or the kind of analogy that was drawn to plague, calling it the white plague, it brings to us the kind of unenviable position that TB has in the imagination of humankind. But what is much more worrying or alarming, or in fact very tragic, is that almost 111 years after the TB bacilli was discovered, and almost half a century after we had very cheap and effective TB drugs, the World Health Organization was almost compelled to declare it a global emergency. And what is much more tragic, I think, than that is that while the global emergency was declared in 1993, today we are about 19-20 years after the global emergency, we find that TB still is one of the leading causes of mortality and morbidity. It is truly what Banerjee called a disease of human suffering. And to our regret, currently we have many more cases of tuberculosis in the world than ever in the history of mankind. And the data here is, quite clearly showing us that. So my attempt in this brief lecture would be really to look at the politics of TB, to help you understand what was the context in which this policy came up, who were the actors who were involved in this policy making, and why did it come up, when did it come up. So whole process of policy making. And this descriptive kind of explanatory framework then becomes an analytical framework when we try and understand who was powerful enough to envision this change or bring about this change in infectious disease policy worldwide. When did it happen? How did it happen? And what kinds of negotiations took place amongst different groups and amongst different parts of the world. Now, some caveats are necessary at this point. Like the neglected status of the TB in the world, our esteemed organizers have given us very little time for TB. So, regretfully, but I will not be able to touch upon the technicality of the disease, the issues of the pathogen or the treatment, or even the operational issues of the program. So what I'm focusing today is really on the power and process of policy formulation, not implementation. So I'm really looking at just policy formulation. And the second important point to bear in mind is that whenever we look at disease, and in this case TB, from an international perspective, please keep in mind that we are looking at only one layer in a very, very complex cake. So it's just a very, very thin layer of a complexity that we're trying to understand. So with these caveats in mind, let's start looking at this 100 years of TB history. But in order to understand this 100 years better, we have to go back a bit into centuries. And the histography of TB really is the histography of Europe and America. That's where the data comes from. And if you really look at the graph on the top, it will show you that in the 17th, 18th century, TB was on the rise. And it rose till about 1800, and then it started to decline. Now, the rise in TB, the peaking of the TB was at the period when industrialization was unfolded. And the conditions of living, nutrition, the crowding in the cities, the urbanization are all explanations of it. And thereafter, it started to decline. And there are several explanations given, the most important being what we have learned from the McEwan's thesis, that it was the improvement in living conditions, the nutritional status that brought about this change. And of course, the sanitarian changes of the kind that Chadwick had thought about also added And thirdly, it was also the beginning of really sequestering all the contagious patients into hospitals and sanatoria. So these 2 or 3 things together explain this decline. But what is also significant for us to bear in mind is that this decline happened much before even the bacilli was discovered. Leave aside the kind of modern scientific treatments. So this decline happened much before that. In fact, the first revolution in terms of TB treatment began with the discovery of streptomycin, and that happened in 1944. And this decade, from these few decades, from 40 to 70s, are the decades of a promise of control of TB. And there was a lot of euphoria when streptomycin was discovered, but very quickly it was found that the strains became resistant to streptomycin. However, other drugs were soon discovered, and with Crofton's work in UK, we came up with what was called the multi-drug regimen. So those were really started. Unfortunately, those regimens were very, very long. 18 to 24 months it took to cure TB. And therefore, with the discovery of rifampicin being added to this multi-drug regimen, things changed. Rifampicin meant many things. It meant first you could have the true short course chemotherapy you could cure in 6 months. It also meant that now the drugs could be given orally, and which also meant now you no longer had to keep the patients in the hospitals or in sanatoria. And at the same point of time, when these drugs were very widely available, there was research happening in India, in our TRC, with the funding of the UK government through the Medical Research Council of UK and support of the WHO, ambulatory care had been sanctioned, and it was found to be the most effective care. And so therefore, by late 1960s, the public health specialists in the world started to believe that control of TB, or treatment of TB, was only a matter of managerial concerns. So we had efficacious treatment, we had effective treatment. Now all that we needed to do was to make this treatment available. And this foresaw the potential for elimination. And you do see decline in the industrialized West. If you look at the annual risk of infection, it comes down tremendously. And by 1980s, TB ceases to remain an important disease in the West. However, the picture was not the same in the developing world. In the third world countries, we hardly see any decline. And right up to the 1980s, the incidence of TB remains steady, or if there is a decline, the decline is very, very small. However, internationally, agencies like the WHO, the other academic institutions really believe that TB was now under their belt and it could be controlled, and therefore they lost all interest in TB. Now, WHO really mirrors what was happening internationally. WHO, which was started up in 1947, started by prioritizing tuberculosis as an important disease. However, by 1970s, TB had lost its critical position in the WHO. In fact, it was allowed to stagnate to such an extent that if you look at the data of WHO, by 1989, it had only 2 staff members in WHO working on tuberculosis. And all the regional offices like CRO, etc., the TB officers' post was soon abolished. And if you look at even the TDR, the Tropical Disease Research Center, you find that even there TB doesn't remain important anymore. So what I'm trying to show is that significance of TB declined. And in fact, if you remember the Walsh and Warren paper of selective primary healthcare in 1979, it had located TB as a medium priority disease, not really a high priority disease. So 70s was really the era of neglect and complacency as far as TB was concerned. It was believed that it's a disease of the past, and TB programs in the West started to move towards elimination. And in fact, if you look at the WHO website in 1980, the Union Against Tuberculosis and Lung Diseases, the European chapter, along with WHO, held a workshop entitled "The Last Fight Against TB Until Elimination." Really telling us that they believed that TB was to be eliminated. And this was reflected even in your scientific journals, in the research, where you find that TB doesn't find itself an important place. The publications, number of publications referring to TB started to decline only till, and it rose only in the 1990s when the resurgence of TB really started, and TB again became a little newsworthy. And this was also then reflected in your pharmaceutical industry as well as your vaccine sector. And even in a country like India, where we had a high load of TB, streptomycin was not something which our manufacturers were willing to make. And in countries like USA, it was completely capped out. So this was the kind of scenario that we had. However, by 1980s, things changed. In 1984, in USA, for the first time in its history, after several decades, they found that notification had not declined as compared to the previous year. And by 1986, the notification of TB cases started to rise. And this was unthinkable, as suddenly there was this rise in TB cases, and this rise was there till about in 1990s, late 1990s. This rise was there for 2000, and then it started to decline after that. Now this whole thing is called this U-curve of concern by Reachman in one of his seminal paper. And this was not the picture only in the US. In Europe also, where you had better surveillance systems, you did find that notification rates started to show an increase. This increase was a little later than the US, but increase was nevertheless there. And this was a big alarm for the world at large, for the medical professionals and the general public. And this marked the resurgence or return of the TB. Now, the TB outbreak in New York actually is regarded as ringing the biggest alarm bell. I mean, it was almost like an awakening call for the public health specialists internationally. New York City in 1990s showed that there were large number of TB cases, and these large number of TB cases were cases with HIV as well. And a large number of these cases were multi-drug resistant. And they found that treating these multi-drug resistant cases was very, very expensive. It was costing the exchequer a lot of money. And a lot of these cases died of TB. And with this, they realized that there was a resurgence of TB in New York City. Now, initially, of course, this resurgence is attributed to a combination of factors. But initially, it was linked to this HIV/AIDS epidemic. And it was also linked to this increasing kind of poverty, homelessness, crowding in the inner cities like Harlem, etc., that one was seeing in New York. And it was also, remember, the era when a lot of people were just being moved out of institutions, medical institutions, mental health institutions were closing down, mental hospitals were closing down, and all of these were now being shifted into the streets. So they first linked to that. But when they started to analyze their data, they found that the growing percentage of these cases were actually cases amongst the immigrants, the recent immigrants who were coming from countries where the TB load was very, very high. Now, this analysis of this whole epidemic was done. And Reachman, who was heading the New York TB Center at that time, wrote this paper on which this U-curve has been plotted, where he said that there are certain reasons for this high growth of this complete epidemic of HIV/AIDS in New York, primarily because there was a complacency. TB had become an uncommon disease. People had really lost all interest in it. Physicians didn't anymore know how to identify and treat TB, and therefore, finding a case which could have been TB case and then starting a treatment, there was a huge lag. And he also pointed out it was also because the whole program, the TB program, had been dismantled. because they had thought that TB is not the problem anymore. The program had been dismantled. Paul Farmer in one of his papers writes that this was because TB, which was actually a categorical disease program, was getting special funds. This fund had now been stopped. It had become a part of the block fund, and even TB beds in New York City, 100 at a point of time in 1973, had completely closed down. So there was this whole dismantling which could explain this rise. Now this kind of epidemic that took place in New York also was happening in many other cities, in the US and also in Europe. But what was more alarming was that this disease now was not just restricted to the marginalized, the destitute. This disease started to be found among the so-called prosperous middle-class people of the Western country. And there was therefore this recognition that TB is no longer a disease of just the poor. There are people traveling across the world, in this globalized world, in this transnational kind of an environment. People are moving up and down. TB does not respect any of the national boundaries. You have immigrants coming in. You have your own people traveling to these spaces which are hotspots of TB. And therefore, TB cannot be looked upon only as a problem of the poor. And what was additionally a point of concern was that today the new TB had HIV with it. The new TB also had multi-drug resistance, and therefore this became a matter of concern. And in New York itself you find, or in the US you find, that the amount of investment for TB suddenly rises. And there is a newfound commitment to TB program. In fact, by 1993, it was a federal policy that if in areas where treatment completion rates fell below 90%, we would start the directly observed treatment. So with this kind of change in policy and program, they were able to bring the TB under control. Now, while this was happening in the West, if you look at the developing parts of the world, the situation was extremely alarming too. These areas, remember, never saw a decline in the incidence of prevalence of TB. But in certain areas, particularly in the sub-Saharan Africa, you find that in 10 years, the incidence and prevalence increased 10-folds, 20-folds. And this was also largely because of the HIV pandemic which had hit these regions. Then if you look at areas like Central Asia, where Central Europe, there too there was a high incidence of TB, largely because USSR had broken down, the health systems were not in place, and this resulted in a very, very increased rates of incidence in TB. And in other parts, because of your neoliberal policy, because of structural adjustment, there were very little investments in health systems, poverty was on the rise, and therefore incidence of TB was also on the increase. Now, by mid-1990s, it was very, very clear that there was a link between HIV, AIDS and TB. And it was also clear that this new TB was the multi-drug resistant TB, which was very, very expensive to manage. And they realized that TB could not be controlled only by doing something in their own countries. It was now a disease which couldn't be looked upon as a disease of the poor, the marginalized, something which was happening in faraway lands. And therefore, if you had to bring about some change, you had to do it globally. And this whole comment that TB anywhere is TB everywhere really captures it. And with this, the international health specialists started to work on trying to find an answer to this problem. And there were a series of consultations which were done, meetings which were done. The most important was setting up of this Commission on Health Research for Development. Now this was set up in 1987. It had its headquarters at Harvard. All important public health specialists were part of this commission. They started to look at research amongst the diseases in the developing world. And at that time, they identified and established TB as a neglected disease. But what this commission did most importantly was that it came across some work which was being done in Tanzania. And they found that this work in Tanzania, which was a very poor country, had been able to bring down TB incidence to quite an extent. Now, they got very interested in this work, and they asked the WHO to review or evaluate this work. Now, the work that was taking place in Africa, in countries like Tanzania, Malawi, and Mozambique, was being done by a public health specialist, a Czech man called Karel Styblo. Karel Styblo had taken up the short course chemotherapy, and he was using it in Africa in a manner that he was able to bring down chlorosis. What he was doing was that he was ensuring that drugs were there, available in time. He was ensuring that he had good data management system. So he was really tracking the patients carefully. But most importantly, for the first 6 months of his treatment, he was ensuring that the drugs were being taken by the patients in front of the eyes of some health worker. Now, WHO evaluated these papers, and these papers were then brought out by Murray in 1991. The publication declared that TB ranks as one of the most cost-effective of all diseases to treat, and with as less as 90 US cents per person, you can actually bring down deaths, and you can save lives. Now, this message, therefore, was very, very clear, and with this, WHO decided to re-establish TB unit, and it appointed somebody called Arakat Kochi as the head of the TB unit. Now, Kochi had been working with UNICEF, and he had been working on the immunization program and on nutrition program in Burma and Afghanistan. And Kochi came from an institution like UNICEF, which was known to, it was an institution which is very different from WHO, because it was known to make the difference. It was known to do things, to show results. So Kochi came with that kind of demeanor, and he was appointed in 89. By 1990, he held a first meeting in which this short course chemotherapy was declared or recommended as a standardized method of control for the developing world. This had happened for the first time in the history of the WHO. Up till now, they were very unsure of really promoting short course chemotherapy for the developing world. But after this meeting, it was accepted as a recommended mode of treatment. And what he did thereafter was that by 1991, in the next World Health Assembly, a new strategy was adopted. And in this strategy came these two new global targets that we all are familiar with, which is curing 85% of your infectious cases and detecting at least 70% of your cases. Now this later was labeled as DOTS, not at this point of time. Please bear in mind, it wasn't labeled as DOTS at this point of time, but this framework was put up. What also significantly was done was that in 1992 it was decided to declare 24th March, the day when Koch really discovered the TB bacilli, as the World TB Day. And in 1993, in a large media event, TB was declared as a global emergency. Now, this new framework of TB control had 5 essential elements. But what one is really looking at is this whole element of directly observed treatment as a critical point, and this is what I'm trying to argue for. So keep that in mind. This was later branded as DOTS, but at that point of time, it was just the 5 elements were just put out. The term DOTS was not used. Now, with this declaration, the World Development Report in 1993, Investing in Health, declared TB as part of your essential clinical packages. Now this is very strange. This is the neoliberal times. World Bank was not interested in really investing in health anywhere. They were telling the state governments to really retreat. But TB, they were willing to invest in. And TB, they had declared as part of an essential clinical package. In fact, in 1991, through the World Bank loan, DOTS program as a pilot program was implemented in China. Now this is actually the turning point. 50 million US dollars were invested in this. Once DOTS was implemented in China, and it was implemented successfully, it changed the whole story. Up till now, what Stagno had been doing was on very small scale. China was a large country. And if you could successfully implement DOTS there, it was believed that you could successfully implement it anywhere. And with that, the faith in DOTS increased, and then it was then promoted and pushed in all the countries. And there was changes in the WHO also. The staffs increased, the money available for TB also increased, and TB was finally being put back on the public policy agenda. Now, however, while this was all happening from 1990 onwards, there was a criticism that WHO is very slow in doing everything. And it is at that point of time, they appointed an advocacy expert, an American by the name of Craig Klott. Now, Craig Klott was not a scientist, was not a public health specialist, he was an advocacy expert. He came into WHO with the purpose of putting TB and DOTS back onto the international map. And his whole approach was of advocacy. And he did two things which really caught the imagination and made it very successful. First was this large media event that he organized in 1993 in London, in which he ensured that WHO makes this unprecedented call of declaring TB as a global emergency. And the next important thing that he did was that Stagno's whole cookbook of 200 pages in which this whole strategy was written out, he shortened it into a 15-page. 5 elements, 15 operational steps, and then he came up with these posters which are very glossy, which are more synthesized, and he came with a brand name of DOTS. Now this name of DOTS is perhaps the most successful of any public health advocacy initiative in the world. Everybody knows DOTS, and he became very successful in making a name in the household as well as making the name amongst the political elites. So he succeeded in doing what he was appointed for. With this, your funding for TB increased. Your research, money available for research also increased. And there were several partnerships which were formulated. And then there were, TB was, Stop TB Initiative was launched. TB became part of your MDG goals. TB also was one of the diseases in your global fund. And in 2006, it was then changed into a new TB strategy. Now, this graph just shows you the kind of rapid expansion in DOTS that you see in countries all over the world. And this is just the Stop TB strategy. The most important change that you see in this is that MDR TB is now being addressed. HIV-related TB is being categorically addressed. And there is a focus on promoting research as well in this whole approach. Now, if you look at the trends of tuberculosis notification worldwide, you find that there is a lot of difference. Now, this, if you look at the rates of TB, they've all been plotted against 100. It's a very relative mark. In order to be able to compare these regions on a relative mark of 100, these rates have been plotted. Now, if you look at the established market economies, you find that there is a decline. A secular decline is there, and that continues to be there. But if you look at the Eastern European region, you find that there the decline is not as sharp as the market economies, the established market economies. But in fact, you find a growth in your TB rates. Now, this is again, as I told you earlier, explained by the dissolution of USSR. First, it was the breakdown of the whole health service system, the public health system in the erstwhile countries who were part of the USSR. And secondly, there was a huge epidemic of HIV/AIDS. If you've read the work of Paul Palmer, there were terms being used as that these are farms of tuberculosis. There were huge numbers of MDR-TB cases being found in prisons, in hospitals, etc. And they were all labeled as farms of tuberculosis. So that was a kind of rise there. Now, if you look at the African region, where the seroprevalence rate is below 10, it is is low, where the seroprevalence rate is above 10, it is high. In areas where there is low HIV prevalence rate, the TB rates are also low. And in areas where HIV prevalence rate is high, the TB rates have also gone up tremendously. And therefore, it is truly an era of co-epidemics of HIV, AIDS and TB. In fact, in much of the literature it is said that unless and until one of this curse to it is not controlled, nothing can be done. And in fact, they talk about at least till we don't find a vaccine for one of the curse to it, we will not be able to bring about any change. Now, I'm just trying to plot this for the 4 countries of interest to us right now. You look at Germany, incidence and prevalence is very, very low. You look at Turkey, relative to Germany, the incidence and prevalence is higher. You come to Nigeria, where load of tuberculosis, of HIV/AIDS is higher, then your incidence and prevalence is high. Now, Nigeria ranks 10th out of the 22 countries of concern. It's lower than Uganda, it's lower than South Africa, but still very, very high. You come to India, where our HIV incidence rates are much lower, but our TB incidence and prevalence is much higher. And our overall load is much higher because of the larger numbers of population who are infected with TB. And India, of course, ranks first among the 22 countries of concern. Now, along with this HIV, AIDS and TB co-epidemic, the other area of concern is your multi-drug resistance, which is on the high. 69 countries reported even the XDR-TB, and just a few months back in Bombay, in Hinduja Hospital, we heard the first case of TDR being reported. Of course, it is contested. Nevertheless, there is this whole rise in drug-resistance tuberculosis cases. Now, if you compare, the developing world with the developed, industrialized world, you find a lot of difference. In the developing world, we have the majority of the cases. 95% of the cases are there. 98% of the deaths are taking place. And TB is not the only disease. It's one of the diseases out of many other issues which are competing for funds in the developing countries. I pick up only the case of Uganda, where $2.50 US are spent per capita on health, and $30 per capita is spent on paying back on interest on loan. So, and even if you think of a subsidized DOT system, which is what is being promoted, this subsidized DOT system is based on loans from the World Bank. And I show you a graph below where this grey bar is actually the loan. And look at the kind of load of loan that India has from the complete budget that you have for TB. The greyish bar are the largest. So that is the kind of load that the loans from the World Bank for subsidized TB are causing. Now, if you look at the industrialized countries, it has again become almost an uncommon disease. Despite the kind of increase that you found in incidence in the 1980s, it is now very much on the decline. And cases are much, much lower, especially when you compare it to the developing world. And demographically, those who are affected by TB have also changed tremendously in the industrialized world. They are now, the cases most reported are those which are coming from the immigrants, the refugees. Now, this has become a challenge for the medical establishment. And in those countries also, again you can revoke what Richmond talked about, the inevitable losses. You can see that in the literature, that there are people, there aren't that many specialists who really know how to handle it. Plus, in this era of cost containment, this universal DOTS is not something that they are able to implement even in their own countries. For UK, for instance, they look at whether the patient is compliant or non-compliant. If the patient is categorized as non-compliant, then that patient is put on DOTS, otherwise not put on DOTS. So that is the kind of situation. Now, even if DOTS can be made available to all in a country, look at the coverage, for instance, in India. We are 100% under DOTS coverage today. However, look at the death rates. The death rates from TB are on the increase. So while the coverage is on the increase, the death rate is also on the increase. Now with this, I'd just like to conclude with some points of trying to explain what was happening. Now, Keith Edwards, the VII had once, while visiting a sanatoria, asked, if preventable, why not prevent it? Now this is something which should hurt the conscience of the public health personnel in the world, or any one of us who is concerned with public health even today. We know from history that TB is a disease of poverty and deprivation. And we saw that there was a decline in TB incidence and deaths much before medical intervention of the kind that we see today happened in the West. And even if you look at the literature or data of the 1980s, you find that incidence is much higher amongst the population who are the poorest of the poor. Whether you're looking at England or Wales, whether you're looking at the US or any other country, you will find it is the homeless, the poorest of the poor, on whom the incidence rates are increasingly high. Now why, there is therefore this close link between TB and poverty, but the complacency that we are facing is of two kinds. This social complacency is one that I'm first talking about. Despite realizing it, the issues of poverty are not being addressed. Now, TB only came up on the international map when it became a threat to others than these disempowered people. Till it was a threat to the disempowered, TB was not significant. But when it became a threat to the other people, because of the kind of globalized world that we were living in, and we were going to have the unintended consequences of globalization, it was going to affect everyone, there was a renewal of interest in TB. Second complacency that one is facing is the scientific complacency. This complete faith and trust in the ability of scientific progress to take care of tuberculosis. Now, modern science has no doubt given us lots of benefit. However, this reductionist kind of trends that you see in scientific medicine means that you start to underestimate all the other factors which contribute to health. And here I'm now referring to what you've been doing on all these days, which is the social determinants of health, where the social determinants of health, the causes of the causes are not addressed. Where health system, which is also a part of your social determinants of health, is not addressed. And therefore, till these causes of the causes are addressed, till we are going to take care of them, just stop TB strategy alone will not be able to contribute much. So conquest of TB by medical advances alone is not going to be possible. It will never occur unless and until these prevailing global inequalities of wealth and healthcare between nations are addressed, unless and until within nations they are able to address the social determinants of health. And of course, non-compliance is something that we always talk about. Non-compliance of patient is really not the problem as Leachman found in his New York study. The non-compliance of the local, national and international level by policymakers becomes much more of an issue. The poor just don't suffer from just material poverty, they suffer from human poverty. So the ones who need the most, who need to comply the most, are the ones who are least able to comply. And then there are a whole lot of issues of caste, gender, etc. that we have to address. And therefore what WHO wrote in one of its documents is very true, that since we have cure for TB, cure which is very cheap, which is very efficacious, effective, available, and we are not able to do anything, it no longer is a medical epidemic. It really is an epidemic of injustice. And this is the epidemic of injustice that we need to address. But just one last point before, I don't want you to go out of this room thinking that this whole policy formulation and diffusion is a very clean and linear process, that as if no contestation takes place. In this case also, there were international contestations. There are contestations which took place in different nations in different periods of time. Internationally also, when Kochi came up with this whole strategy of DOTS, and when Craig was able to put this up as an advocacy or brand name, it was contested very ferociously in the field by the scientists, because they said this dots and this issue, this just emphasis on operational issues is really oversimplification of a very complex problem. And by only highlighting this, we are going to take away really from what is required in TB or other neglected diseases is more research in chemos, more research in vaccines, and therefore there were contestations. Now there are contestations which were even done nationally. If you look at the history of India, what we are most familiar with, when RNTCP and DOTS was being introduced in the country, it was ferociously opposed for some time as something which was foreign and was being imposed on the country. And we had rightfully argued that the country like India has very rich experience of TB control, and why this rich experience of TB control is not being looked into. So your own homegrown ideas were not being accepted. Nevertheless, it's not an exaggeration to say that in developing worlds where we've always found very high incidence and prevalence of TB fell off the national priority long time back. And till like in India, till we had public health specialists, doctors who were really interested, or who were really working in the field of TB, they retired. This didn't remain important at all. And actually bringing back the TB onto the national arena was really because of the pressures of advocacy by WHO and the advances of loans by the World Bank. That brought it up. Otherwise, it had also fallen off the map. And therefore, what I want to end with is what I began with. Please keep in mind that when we are looking at any problem, and in this case TB from an international perspective, we have only looked at one layer of a very complex case. So there is contestation which happens. I have not looked at the diffusion in terms of acceptance in different contexts, but if you look at each of your country contexts, you would find variation. So this contestation I have not looked at. However, therefore it's not such a linear process. I just wanted to explain to you how a disease which was neglected for such a long period of time, how it became an important issue on the policy agenda. Thank you.